Power is lack of dependency. When we empower women in negotiations, they negotiate as well as men do.
So today we're kicking off strong. Our expert today is a negotiation expert because, after all, everything in life is a negotiation.
When you're negotiating on behalf of your children, your family, your community, women do as well as men.
So given that, it's so important to have this conversation about what really makes for a good negotiation, what actually gets in the way of us negotiating and advocating for our needs, and how do we overcome these obstacles?
Every conversation has 3 phases. Phase number 1 is the second phase is phase 3 is the
what is one piece of advice that every woman in business should hear? So I am so excited and so proud to welcome to our first ever expert episode, Noa Sheer. Welcome to the Powerhouse Diaries, the podcast for and by brave, bold, and badass business owners. If you're an entrepreneur who has outgrown those cookie-cutter business strategies and #girl boss cliches, you're in the right place. Because let's face it, entrepreneurship is at least equal parts messy buns and runny mascara as it is the highlight reel we see online. So let's get real about what it really takes to build and run a quote-unquote successful business, blood, sweat, and margaritas included. I'm your host, Yaela, your rebellious entrepreneurial fairy godmother, and join me as I sit down with rockstar female founders for the most juicy, deep, and meaningfuls around success, life, and everything in between. Now it's time for you to step into your powerhouse era. No, I'm so excited to have you here. We were just saying, like, it's the end of the day. You've had a long day.
Yep.
I've had a long day. And we're both like, oh, we're here, we're sitting, we get to do this.
But this is my favorite part of the day,
I
sure.
know, we get to play.
Yeah.
Like, I literally was having a conversation with another female founder today. And I was like, I get to do this. I get to talk to the most awe-inspiring, talented, like, just like, wow, like women creating such different but such profound and beautiful things and creating so much impact. Like, pinch me, seriously.
What's more interesting?
Yeah, exactly. So first of all, how did you get here? Where you're like, this is my calling, this is what I want to do. And secondly, how do you navigate that?
So I was very attracted to negotiation skills when I realized that they are the solution to all problems that I was seeing. I was working in human rights, and then I was teaching at universities, and I was involved with different industries and different businesses, and I was seeing not only from work but also from my friends, from people who were in the army, from people who were doctors, lawyers, that their problems were many times problems of missed opportunities, of miscommunication, of ego. And so much could be solved by negotiation skills. And that's why I invested more and more time. I did some research on this, an MPhil, and I started a PhD on this. And I wanted to be able to then bring all of that wealth of knowledge from academia, from all this research, the compelling ones, not everything is compelling, but the best research, to actual negotiators and seasoned negotiators. So not just novice negotiators, but people who think that they're good already, to show them what else they could do, And so that became the calling. As for, what do people think of me when I walk through the door? So my favorite story is that I paid a lot of money to see a branding expert once in my life. And this man, I said, tell me about your business, blah, blah, blah. But the whole time he was sort of looking at me and thinking to himself. And then when I finally stopped, he said, well, what do you do about your real problem, your main problem? This. What do you do about this? And he was signaling at me. And I went, excuse me? But I knew exactly what he was talking about. He said, you don't look like the typical negotiator.
Yeah.
When I think of negotiator, I think man. I think older than you are. I think maybe white hair, maybe a bit of a tummy, a suit for sure. And I think someone who is very dominant, someone who knows how to leverage power, someone who can bang on the table and demand what they want, it's not really the vibe that you're giving.
No.
And I thought, how interesting, because I know this. I don't have imposter syndrome because I know the value of my product. I've seen it in action. But I do have hyper awareness that when people see me, they go, surely
Really?
she doesn't represent the qualities that a good negotiator needs to have. A good negotiator, according to their assumptions, would be very masculine in the way that they speak and the presence and occupy space.
But that's where your power lies, in not playing a part, but leveraging your own strengths and who you are. But I love, first of all, that guy. Wow.
I'm so glad he gave it to me straight.
Yes. Well, but, could have been maybe a little bit more, I don't know, not even subtle, just not so rude. It's funny because you understand, like, they don't match the stereotypical idea that people may have of a negotiator. I remember quite early in my days in my agency, I hired someone on my team, and he was a man and he was 10 years older than me. And at one point we are at a cafe somewhere in Amsterdam and we're negotiating with a client. No, I'm telling the story wrong. We're not negotiating with a client. It's someone pitching to us. It's an agency pitching their services to us.
And they're looking at him.
Yes. So this woman is sitting across from me who's pitching. And the two of us are sitting across from her. And for the whole duration of the pitch, which was like a full 30 minutes, she did not look at me. She just looked at him, pitched to him. Every time I kind of, chimed in with a question, it was almost like, we'll get to that. And at one point I was like, oh, I'm going to enjoy this. Let this play out, right? And I let her do her whole song and dance. And then at the end, she asked the guy next to me, like, what do you think? When can we kind of expect, your reaction? Do you know what the timeline is? And he's like, oh, it depends. I have to talk to my boss, see what she thinks. And they're like, okay, yeah. And then he turns to me. And he's like, Jelle, what do you think? The face, the look, the horror.
Yeah.
And what it showed me was that, I want to say in 2025, but this was 10 years ago. But that still, in this modern day of age, with all the work that is done and all the shifts that have been made, still also a fellow female founder automatically assumed that out of the two people at the table, the older owner of a penis must be the boss. And initially I was like offended, and I was like, how rude. I was like, actually I can't blame her, because it is the image that still kind of lives on.
Yeah.
And you know what, I personally love it. Like, please underestimate me. Please. That's...
It turns you into a secret weapon.
Yeah.
But also, the qualities that you need to be a good negotiator have nothing to do with being dominant and with banging on the table and demanding or even leveraging power. They have everything to do with being curious, with knowing how to read the other party, with being able to put your ego aside and really think about this as a problem to be solved without you in it, and the ability to bring the other person's chair, metaphorically speaking, to your side of the table. And so it only takes one sentence that I say that people who might have been looking metaphorically at another person, the male, to be looking at me and give me their full attention. And so, look, if I was selling weights, or selling protein powder, and I was this big muscular man and I was lifting a weight to show you that the powder works, that wouldn't have been very impressive. But if the way that I look now, am able to lift this big weight and say, buy this protein powder, that would be a lot more impressive.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm hoping in this podcast that your female viewers, listeners, or maybe they need to be viewers to be able to see the packaging of this negotiation talent. See that it doesn't matter what you look like. Anybody could be a good negotiator if you apply these strategies, if you get curious about the other person's interests, and if you have empathy. And I think women are really good at that.
Yeah, I think that is like innately, also again generalizing, but innately, that is often our superpower. So let's leverage that. When I saw, I was this is how I met Noa. I was doing a little online stock. And I saw what you were doing, what your business is all about. And the first thing that came up for me is like, that is so badass. That is so badass. So tell us, what do you do?
I help people negotiate for outstanding outcomes.
And you know what? It sounds, like a big scary thing, but one thing that really resonated with me when we were talking earlier is everything is a negotiation.
And everyone is a negotiator. But people don't realize this so much, and they rely on the skills that they have built naturally throughout life.
Yeah.
And what they don't realize is that we're told and taught to negotiate the wrong way throughout our lives. So even if they are aware that they're negotiating, and they are experienced negotiators, and they think they're doing a good job, they might just be repeating old habits, old ways of negotiating that are not getting them the maximum outcomes, the potential. They're not meeting the potential of that negotiation. And to see it from the outside as the negotiation coach or guide or trainer is absolutely devastating.
Yeah, because you see so much potential for resolution just fly and just get lost.
Not just resolution, not just when there is a problem, but also when there's an opportunity. So you and I are sitting here, and it might be nice to talk for an hour, and then we go home and say, have a nice life. Or we can use this opportunity to see what else we could do together and explore how we can not just help each other, but what value we can find in this relationship. And that would be the exploration that I help with as an outsider to the negotiation, because usually in business negotiations there's more than just the content of that negotiation that we can talk about.
Yeah, and that actually, I love that so much, because when you hear negotiation, my first thought is, kind of getting what you want or finding common ground. But what you're saying is you're working in a framework that's value and collaboration led. Tell me more about how that works.
I'm interested in value, not price. I think a lot of negotiations go down the path of what's the price going to be? What's the damage going to be here? And so the negotiators are trying to minimize damage rather than maximize value. So when we're talking about sales negotiations, for example, if the negotiation is about price alone, it could be a very linear conversation. And it could be a very boring conversation, and frankly, very adversarial or confrontational for a lot of people. They don't enjoy it. But when we flip that script and start speaking about the value, the cost could be completely marginal, not just in the conversation, but also to the buyer and to the seller. Maybe there is all this value that we can talk about that makes this a pleasant conversation, that creates trust between the parties, and that can reveal new ways of working together. Not all the time. I'm not naive to think that all conversations have to be about, wow, airy fairy, what else can we do together? But when you but it's not just about that. Sometimes it is competitive, and that's fine. But if you make it a linear conversation that starts and finishes with price, nobody enjoys.
No, and everyone loses in the end. Everyone loses. I was listening to a talk you gave recently, and you shared is it the orange theory, orange story?
The orange story.
And I just, I love
It's not my
it.
story.
No, I know. It was funny because my partner was there. He's like, I know the orange story. He's a
Everyone
lawyer.
knows the orange story.
I did not know the orange story. So
Okay.
humor me or humor us in case I'm not the only one that doesn't know it, because it illustrated so beautifully what you're describing here. And it made it, so tangible.
I can tell the orange story, but you need to know that there are multiple versions of the story.
But this is the right one.
The way that I tell it has to do with three sisters, and I think it's funny. So there are three sisters living in Iceland or Greenland or somewhere cold, Sweden, I don't know. And they don't regularly get fruit. They don't have access to fruit. But when the father goes away on business trips, he comes back with presents for his daughters. He usually brings fruit and vegetables, and this time he returns with an orange. Now the sisters immediately fight over this orange. I want it, it's mine. The little one says, I've never had an orange before, I've never seen an orange before, I want it. And the oldest one says, oh, but it's been years since I've seen my last orange and I miss the taste and I know what it tastes like, so I really want to have it again, please. And the middle sister says, well, last time you're the one who got it, so this time obviously it's our turn, or at least, I get a part. And so they start thinking about what would be a fair way to split this orange. Now, the elder sister says, I think it should be by age. I've got the biggest tummy, I'm the biggest person, so I think I should get the biggest part of the orange. And the youngest one says, but I'm the youngest, so I deserve, you've had some before, I've never had, so I think I should get it. And the middle sister says, oh, this is going in a terrible direction. Why don't we just do what's fair, and we split it into 3 equal parts. And so they split the orange into 3 equal parts. The eldest sister is now really upset. She responds the way that we respond when we compromise. It's a meh kind of outcome. It's not neither here nor there. She's not happy. And she says, now you're not getting any part of my cake. I was going to share my cake with you, but you're not having any. And the elder sisters say, wait, hold on, what cake? Yeah. And she says, I was going to take the rind of this orange and make it into this amazing orange cake that I was going to bake for the whole family. And the middle sister says, oh, that's funny. I was going to have a glass of orange juice. And the little sister says, well, I came back from kindy with all of this knowledge about how to put seeds, to plant seeds and grow. I was going to grow an orange tree for us. And so clearly we understand that there is a better way of splitting that orange that allows for each of the sisters to get exactly what they want and 100% of what they want, right? The rind, the juice, and the seeds. And while this is, it's reflective of business negotiations. It's not exactly how it happens, but it shows us that we really need to explore for why it is that people come into the negotiation.
Yes.
And what is the outcome that they want long term? In other words, what are their interests, not their goals?
Yes, and that's a big differentiation.
Yeah, the goal was having the orange, as much of the orange as possible, but the interest is the orange juice. And so when we know that, or the rind or whatever, when we know that, then we can be very creative about how to design the outcome. And so I think that's my job, really.
Yeah.
Being curious about the interests of each party, and then also designing the outcome that would maximize value.
I think that is so powerful, and because it goes so far beyond the top line goal. And I think this is true in business goal setting as well. We often, begin to start the new year and we have a goal and we want to reach a certain revenue point, or we want to buy a car, or whatever it is that we're striving for. But it's when you think about what is actually underneath that goal, why is that important to you, that you really start shifting the game. Because then if you can actually tend to that need, the actual car or number becomes almost irrelevant, and also inevitable at the same time, which is funny.
Because you realize that it's the means to the end. And if we're just negotiating about the means to ends, we're going to get stuck, because means, or in other words, goals, are usually concrete and they're finite.
Yeah.
And if we talk, it might be money, it might be the orange, it might be whatever, it might be time. when we're talking about goals and we're negotiating at the goal level, then we find that it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
And it's very hard then to, what we call in the negotiation language, to increase the pie and to create new value and to create unprecedented value sometimes.
Yeah.
So when I help guide my clients to negotiations which they then negotiate, right? I don't always negotiate on their behalf. They go, and with the skills, they negotiate outcomes that surprise them and surprise everyone around them. And so the end goal really, I shouldn't use the word goal, the end objective really for my company Sheer Negotiations is to create people who within their environments are those go-to people, the people that when others negotiate, they come to them, they can help others, they can come up with these unprecedented outcomes,
solutions.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this earlier, and why is it, obviously this is a human condition, but undeniably there is a kind of a discrepancy when you look at how traditionally, and generalizing, women show up to a negotiation versus men, and how do you navigate that?
It's a great question. I've been very careful not to stereotype women, because actually the literature shows that there's no real difference between the outcomes that we get as women in comparison with men across all negotiation types.
Yes.
So it's not that we are the inferior race. It's not that, some people have assumptions about us coming into negotiations. For example, when I sold my car, the guy who came to buy it was like, yes, she's a woman.
Yeah, you're like, yes, he's underestimating me. Great.
Yes, he's come with an ego. Fantastic. He brought his friend to show off that he could get a good price. This is amazing for me because that presents an opportunity. But
oh boy, did he wake up on the wrong side that day?
Look, he got an excellent price on the car. Yeah. His interest was to impress his friends, so I gave him a huge discount on the car, but I took out the fresh tires, the registration, the warranty, everything that I was going to offer on top, and it ended up being cheaper for me and great for him. So he paid overall a higher price, but he got exactly what he needed, which was to impress his friend.
Ooh, that is so powerful.
But look, it's ethical, right? It's what you might say is a win-win. I hate the term win-win, but people are searching for it. It has to do with interests. Anyway, back to women.
Yes.
I think there are assumptions about women, but the literature and all of the studies show that overall there is no real difference in how we negotiate across all types of negotiations. Where there is a substantial gap, a painful gap, is when we negotiate for our own benefit, whether it be usually in the workplace. So for salary, for assistance or resources, for deadline, for things that have to do with me. And where we feel like if I ask for more, I might be seen as greedy. So there's a substantial gap there.
How much of that is societal programming, conditioning? How much of that is the story of, as a woman, you're here, you're like, we're here to kind of please and fit in and just kind of play the part versus really take up space?
This is not research that I've done myself, but I've dived deep into that literature, and I have some theories now based on everything that I've read. I don't think it's always about what we're taught. I think it's about the social costs that exist right now. So we could look at our childhoods and what we were taught about, to be a pleaser or to be, to do what people expect of us, to contort, like Lennon,
to be the good girl.
Doyle says, to contort into these boxes and to fit and all that. We can talk about that, but the more interesting part is that we are clever enough to recognize a social cost or a relationship cost of demanding what we deserve.
But what about, I hear you, I'm not arguing with you. It's something I'm trying to balance as I don't want to say grow older, but I guess as I
mature,
as I mature, old.
Yes.
No, but as I mature, because that has nothing to do with actual age in my life, but also specifically in my business. I hear you, like with the social cost of using our voice or being perceived a certain way. But the more I mature, the more I become aware of the cost to me when I erase part of my voice or of my story or my experience, or do it in a way to avoid the social cost. In the end, the cost to me and my sense of integrity and self is actually something I'm no longer willing to pay.
Yeah.
And I think that's a trade-off we are still making. Like, do you go for the acceptance, and that's something primal as well, the safety of being part of the herd, accepted, versus can I look myself in the eye and say I was true to what I know, to what is me?
Well, I've got two things to say about that. First, as I mature, I realize that screw those people who judge me, and screw those people who don't give me the things that I deserve. And I'm far more likely to let go of those relationships. And that's fine. Happy to pay the cost. And the second thing is that there is a huge cost that we don't recognize of being the doormat.
Exactly.
Or the other person thinking, oh, that was easy, or glad she didn't ask for the salary she deserved. There's a huge cost that we ignore of not getting what we deserve in negotiations. There's also a cost of leaving value on the table when we don't negotiate for the optimal outcomes, as in there was such potential there and we didn't realize it. But that's not a relationship cost, because everyone at the table may have not realized that they had left value on the table. But in situations where we are negotiating for our pay, for example, and we don't fight for what we deserve. Well, we don't have to fight, but we don't even ask for what we deserve. The interviewer, the manager, whoever's at the other side of the table is thinking, wow.
Yeah.
Or she doesn't deserve it.
Well,
she knows it.
Because, we are, obviously most people listening are female founders. So it's less about negotiations, not everyone, like it's also, but less about negotiations around like pay. But I find this very true as well with negotiations around pricing. And not even, there's such thing as perceived value.
Yeah.
And when we undercut ourselves to begin with, out of fear of being seen as, too much, too expensive, too up ourselves, whatever, like who the fuck does she think she is?
Yeah.
So like if too up ourselves, too loud, too much, and we don't even quote or ask for a certain price or negotiate, it's often perceived as, oh, she must not be that great. She must not be kind of that top
it's
level.
It's a cheap product.
Yeah.
Because it's not a good product.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's huge. And that comes back to negotiating over value and for interests rather than on price. Because if the negotiation is about price, then we're trying to bring, the buyer is trying to bring down the price, the seller is trying to bring up the price. If it's a negotiation on interests, actually the buyer, if they have and they may not have a big budget, but if they do, they want certainty. Or let's say need, because we're talking about interests. Their need might be certainty. Their need might be to impress their colleagues that they were able to secure for their company a really, really high-end product. Or they were able to bring in a keynote speaker who, charges $200K per hour. I have that connection. I've brought in a high-end product. That's negotiating over needs. You have to get curious about what is it they truly need there. Because if we do talk just at the goal level about prices, immediately we fall into trying to bring down the price. And it's sort of a race to the bottom, and it's really, really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it's not a fun game to play. I hear you, but how do we get clear on the needs and the intent of the people across the table? Because in the end, like we can only assume.
No, I've made an art out of finding
I will get it.
So there are ways. There is a technique that I teach actually, and it's called differentiation. So understanding your own interests, there is a process for that, because that's something that people don't know either.
Yes.
They go into the negotiation thinking they know what they want, but they don't really think about the needs there. And then there is a process for trying to understand the needs of the other party, and that would include a lot of research, and there's a process for that. Also probing questions at the table, and a whole category, or like a whole host of tasks about creating the rapport and the trust necessary to get that information out of the other party. You can also think about structuring the negotiation in a way that's really helpful. I'll give you a really small example.
Yes, I love that.
There was a CEO of a construction company that I worked with for years in Australia, and he had his way of getting information out of the subcontractors. So he would negotiate the price of formwork or tiling or carpentry work for a huge site in the CBD, for example. And then the subcontractor would come to his door, to his offices, and he would stand at the door and say, "Mate, I'm dying for a coffee. Our machine is broken. It's always broken. Let me take you to the best coffee in Sydney, okay? Best cafe in Sydney." Now, I don't know if this is the best cafe in Sydney. What I do know is that he timed the walk, and it was a 10-minute walk from his office to this cafe. Now, when you're walking shoulder to shoulder down the street, you're not going to have a negotiation over price.
No.
You're going to talk about the wife and the dog and the kids who are doing their HSC. This is the final exams. You're going to be talking about the market and how shit this is and how terrible that is. And you're going to find some common ground, and you're going to whine about something, and also
connect on a human level.
Yeah, and you're going to reveal some information, and ultimately you're going to show what mood you're in and whether you're even ripe for this negotiation, or whether he needs to find a different time. And so they make it to the cafe, then he buys the coffee. He's working there on reciprocity, which is a whole art of influence. He buys the coffee for the other guy. They walk back. They've had 20 minutes at least of talking about, chit-chatty stuff.
Yeah.
And after he worked with me, he also knew how to use that time to probe for the information that he needed.
To ask the right questions.
And then when you sit down, it's a whole other story.
I think that is genius. And I saw this thing about, it was a thing about parenting and having conversations with your children, difficult conversations with your children. And they recommended you either go for a walk or you go for a drive.
Yeah,
because if you are literally facing the same way, moving towards the same thing, the literal situation you're in translates to how you can approach a problem. So instead of it's you against me, or I want something from you or need something, kids, but I'm assuming this is true in this case as well, kind of you're moving towards a joint goal, literally together, and it creates somehow the physicality of it, more opportunity for connection instead of going against each other.
Yeah, I think people are far more comfortable when they're not stared at.
Yes.
And we might think about that when we're setting up a negotiation. I mean, do we want to be seated opposite each other? Do we want to be seated on the same side of the table or around a corner? Do we want a couch, or do we want a boardroom table? I think with my clients very carefully about how to set up the negotiation. In Asian cultures, you would have a meal first. You would bring this person to your family to meet your family before you do anything, or get drunk with them or whatever. But
I like that. We should bring that back,
guys.
Get
drunk. I mean, not everyone drinks, and that's a lot of pressure too. But I think building a little bit of trust and getting everyone to sort of is very important.
Yeah, and hard. And I mean, that's why your business exists, because if it were easy, everyone would do that. But I'm just, it was funny. We were on the phone earlier this week to set this interview up. And you know how your phone gives you memories of like this date in whatever, a couple of years ago. And after we hung up, the picture popped up of me signing the sale contract of my previous business, which was a very difficult negotiation and a very difficult process for me. And I was looking at that picture just after our conversation around negotiations, and I could see like the pain through my smile. Like it was a really, in hindsight, it was a great moment. But in that moment, it felt like all consuming. And given our conversation, I was like, if only I'd had that framework or more understanding of that. I think the whole process, even if the bottom line was exactly the same, wouldn't have had to feel so jarring. But that trust building that you're talking about, there is some underlying, or at least there was for me, and maybe that's saying more about me, some underlying feeling of like they're out to get me, right?
They might be.
They might be. How do you stay open and curious, but also vigilant and smart?
So that's a great question, because many negotiations are transactional in nature, and so they're likely to be completely competitive.
Yeah.
And you're not interested in building a long-term relationship with this person. You're not looking for long-term value necessarily. You just want the best price possible, and that can be very uncomfortable. But even there is a process where we apply a competitive structure to the conversation. We apply competitive tactics. We aggressively anchor and manage the perceptions of the other party. And we need to remember that this negotiation can also be interest-based, because the interests of the other party will not be all around money.
No.
They'll also be about timing, or method of payment, or terms, or, like when you buy a house, there's a whole host of other things that you can negotiate. And so there is a way to attack it without going, I want to, build trust and love this person. No, we're still being very competitive, but we're being extremely strategic about it.
Yeah. And I think like just listening to you is the first time. So I sold this business, 6 years ago. And the whole process, like I said, left quite a bit of a bad taste in my mouth for a while. And for the first time, I'm realizing it was about those little soft edges, like those little things that I thought it was just about the price. But I think my experience of the very same price would have been so different with what I felt was, recognition, or, acknowledgement, or it's never just about the one thing. And actually, I didn't even realize that until now, that very same amount would have felt completely different had I had my needs seen and met, and also had I realized that myself.
Yeah, very much. But I think most people going into a negotiation about price make assumptions that this is the one and only thing we're negotiating, that this is the most important thing. One story that I love to tell is from the construction industry again. And I tell it not because this negotiation is 100% competitive. It can be collaborative, but price is at the center of it. And in this industry, negotiations are very cutthroat. And the culture is very testosterone based. Yeah. So these negotiations can be quite aggressive. And so I'll set the scene. The negotiation is between a construction company, so they manage projects like high-rise buildings at the CBD of Sydney, and the subcontractors that offer the tiling, the roofing, the
everything,
formwork, the whatever. And they asked, so I'm training this construction company, the project managers, and they say, well, how can we bring them down on price? And I said, well, what else can we add to the negotiation? Because we can be very competitive, but we don't want it to be just on price. So what can we add to, I call it a bargaining mix. What can we add to the bargaining mix? And they went, no, you don't know anything. There is a standard contract. We're not going to add to it. The standard contract will have a number of clauses. We'll talk about price and time and, but it's a standard list. We're not going to add to it a bottle of wine. And I said, okay, well, that's exactly why you need to start adding to it, because all of your competitors will have the same number of clauses in their standard contracts, but you're going to add something special. So let's get into the head of this carpenter that you're negotiating with. What matters to the carpenter who's building a high-rise building in the CBD? And we thought about it, we brainstormed, and I have a carpenter builder husband. So I know
you
that
know what makes them tick.
I know that when you're building in the CBD, parking's going to be a huge issue. Now, people listening to this podcast might know this already inherently, because when you're on the outside, you can think creatively and you can get into other people's shoes. But when you're in it, you're thinking in your own head, right? So parking. What if we added parking to the contract? So instead of the carpenter having to park far away, carry their tools, which is not going to happen, or park on site and cop a fine every day, why don't we just pay for parking in the city? It's going to cost what? $1,000 max for the length of the project? When they did that, they got a $15,000 discount immediately, because that carpenter thought, they see me, I want to work with them. That's something that I want.
It's so basic, and I'm not saying easy at all, but it's basic human behavior. It's, hey, people want to be seen, people want to be heard and understood to a degree, or at least to make an attempt to do so.
And they want convenience. You're talking about needs, aren't you? It's not what they need. It's not what they want. It's what they need.
And those are two very different things. I'd like to circle back a bit to the trepidations a lot of women and female founders might have around negotiating. We talked about the social cost. We talked about fear of being seen a certain way, perceived a certain way, conditioning, whatever it may be. However, we started this conversation by saying everything is a negotiation. So how do we bridge that? Like, I want to look at what can we do to help ourselves navigate these negotiations with more skill, with more comfort, and more just knowing,
There are skills that I teach specifically to women. So I work specifically with groups of women in every industry. These skills are absolutely brilliant, implementable. There are these tips. I can give you a few today.
Yeah, give us a few. I'm gagging for it.
There is so much research. Maybe I shouldn't say so much, but there is research around the difference between men and women negotiators in the context that I explained before, where there is a difference. And one thing that really works for women is not negotiating on behalf of ourselves. So if the context is the problem that we're negotiating for ourselves, take ourselves out of that context. Pretend that you're negotiating for someone else. Because when you're negotiating on behalf of your children, your family, your community, your organization, women do as well as men, if not better. So when we're negotiating for, let's just take the most selfish thing, my salary, okay? When we're negotiating just for me, for my salary.
Can we turn it to founders? Can we really look at female founders, the negotiations that we come up in, because in the end, that's you, that's me.
Okay, so let's say we're negotiating for an opportunity or for the price of our services. Or do you want to give me another example?
Yeah, I think pricing is a really interesting one, or because it ties into self-worth also so much, and because our businesses are to a degree an extension of ourselves, it's hard to pretend it's not about you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the negotiations that founders have. Let's talk about price.
Yeah.
When we're negotiating the price of our services, we need to be in the mindset where we're not negotiating for ourselves. This is not for me, and this is not about me. This is about the client. All right, so they will understand the branding of your product through the price that you're giving to them, and it's about who you're negotiating on behalf of. It may be an organization. There are people within this organization. It may be also an artificial beneficiary that you can make up. For example, I had a mentor, a male mentor, who would push me and would have me report back to him after negotiations. And so I needed to report back to this person. He would get very disappointed if I didn't up my prices. And so that would be my artificial beneficiary. It turns out that when we're negotiating on behalf of somebody else, and you can choose who that person is, your parents, so that you can take care of them in old age, your children, your unborn children, people in the future. But when you're negotiating for somebody else, we tend to be more confident and we tend to up our prices. We also might want to think about how we appear and where we want to position ourselves in the market. I mean, people know this already, but benchmarking and researching what other people are doing, what similar products in the market are selling for. I made the mistake for a long time of not researching what products like mine were selling for, and I was selling them at whatever price I thought matched the situation. But really, if you don't do that research, you're in the dark. There are so many other tips. There's really interesting research about power, how women react to empowerment. And this is really fantastic.
And it's such a buzzword, like it's empowerment left, right, and center. Okay, so tell me about that.
No, but in the context of negotiation, power is a lack of dependency. That's how it's defined.
Oh, power is a lack of dependency.
If I want you to give me this glass of water and you don't want to give it to me, I could be very frustrated in that negotiation. But if I could ask somebody else to get me a glass of water and they'll say, fine, I don't need you.
Exactly.
I've got power, and I can even threaten to walk away. So power is lack of dependency. When we empower women in negotiations with an alternative, what we in the field call the BATNA, it's a terrible acronym, best alternative to the negotiated agreement, BATNA, or Plan B, they negotiate as well as men do. Even in the contexts that I was speaking about that are difficult for us. When we have an alternative, we're more confident in the negotiation. So if you have an important negotiation with a customer, get yourself another customer, an alternative. If you have a negotiation with an investor, get yourself an alternative investor. Make sure that you're negotiating alternatives, not just the one negotiation.
Right. And that sounds great and makes total sense because then you have options. So, there's I guess that is where the feeling of power comes from. And, it's easier said than done. I'm negotiating a big contract. I'm negotiating a new hire that's going to be pivotal for my business. Just find another new huge contract or another big investor or another, so that you have multiple options. That's not always readily available.
That's right. It's hard. It's not easy to negotiate. Well, nobody said it was easy, but when we do have alternatives, we feel more powerful, and we also have benchmarks for what we should expect in the negotiation. That's quite a lot of work to do on the sidelines and in preparation for a negotiation. And I didn't say it was easy. But when you do have a strategy, you would build that into the process so that when you come to an important negotiation, even if you don't have a huge alternative contract waiting for you, you have an understanding of what your alternative to winning this would be. It would be a bunch of little clients, or it would be, this is how I'm going to get by. I'll be okay.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, because if everything in life is a negotiation, there's the big negotiations where you can do your homework and have all the alternatives and have all your ducks in a row and come in walking prepared. But everything in life is a negotiation. And how do we kind of do this on the fly? How do we show up powerfully for ourselves, but also for whoever's on the other side of whatever table it is, in a continuous cycle of give and take?
You remember the basics. And the basics for me are two frameworks. One is that there are 3 ways to persuade, 3 approaches to persuasion, and there is one that I would choose. So we can get into that. I might just finish the sentence that the other is a model of negotiation where every conversation has 3 phases. And if you go through those 3 phases, you're on the right track. You're not going to miss anything. So these are very easy, 3-stepped frameworks.
I love me a good 3-step strategy.
So the first framework is that there are 3 approaches to persuasion, and we might get stuck in one where we need to be in another, and we need to consciously and with lots of awareness choose where we want to be. So the three approaches are the power approach, where we persuade someone to comply with us by threatening them or by showing them that they don't have much of a choice, that we have all the power. And I always like to give example of my children. I know it's silly, but it's easy to understand this way. If I say to my child, eat your dinner or there's no dessert, that's the power approach, right? So I'm threatening in a way. But unions do this, and lawyers do this. You don't want to go to court, so you best settle. And the problem with this approach is that because there is an underlying dynamic of reciprocity between people, if I use a power approach, you're very likely to respond in kind. And so I'm getting myself into a contest of who's more powerful. And I can't always win. My 6-year-old will respond with, I didn't want dessert to begin with.
Yeah.
I can't even win in that negotiation. So I don't want to get myself into a power struggle, and I want to avoid that one. The second is the rights approach. The rights approach is when we get someone to comply with us by proving that we're deserving.
Yeah.
All right, we're entitled. And so we will usually reference some very neutral, some very ethical, some acceptable criteria, and according to that criteria, look, here's the evidence for
like
why
the
I'm
sisters
deserving.
with the orange,
right? Or according to the KPIs, look, I've met them and I've done my hours and I've done extra work and I've been here long enough, blah blah blah. But the problem here again is reciprocity, and when we get into that struggle or contest, the other person is going to be thinking about counterexamples. So, here's the evidence for why I'm deserving. Well, here's some counter evidence. You've been here long enough. There are people who have been here longer and haven't had a raise, or haven't had a promotion. If I say to my kids, I've slaved all day in the kitchen for you, you best eat this, they're going to say, well, nobody asked you to cook, and why are you slaving in the kitchen? And it's going to be a competition again about who's more entitled. The last one is the one that I try to live in, and that's the interest-based approach. And with the interest-based approach, you're getting someone to comply with you by selling it to them as an opportunity. Now, I hear my words, I hear myself from the outside. It's not selling as in manipulating them to hear whatever offer I've come up with as good for them. It's not just the unethical selling of bullshit to them. No. But it is the understanding of their interests, first and foremost, and then either selling or designing my offer to match their interests. So I might say to my son, if you want to be really good at parkour, which is what he's learning at the moment, if you want to be big and strong, you have to eat vegetables because they will give you the strength that you need. In business negotiations, this plays out, and I could give you examples, but I don't think we have time. The thing is, with the interest-based approach, you have to do the work of truly understanding the interests of the other party. You can't come and sell an idea when you're just assuming what matters to the other party. You have to actually find out. And so if you bring that to all of your negotiations, where it's someone passing you in the hall, it's your partner, it's your children, it's work, it's a big contract, it's whatever, selling a car, and you remember to bring yourself back to the interest-based approach, which you can mix with any other approach. But first and foremost, try to ask yourself, what are they truly interested in? And is that in conflict with my interests? And how can I sell this as an opportunity? You'd be doing well. Yeah, and even ask them, because that's the example you gave, I think, of the construction company that took the subcontractors out for coffee. Not just assume what they wanted, but really find out. Spend the time. Yeah. I love that. Those the three ways of persuasion, and we go for value, the interest-based. Yes. And then there was another. So the second framework is it's called now the Sheer negotiation model. I have called it the Sheer negotiation model, but I have to give credit to the co-author of the book, Effective Negotiation from Research to Results, Ray Fells. So this is a brilliant guy and a brilliant academic and negotiator, and these 3 phases of a negotiation are actually his, and based on this I have built a whole model of preparing for a negotiation and holding a negotiation. If you don't remember any of that, it's enough to remember that it should have 3 phases in order to do well in every conversation. So phase number 1 is differentiation, understanding what are my true interests, why am I here, what am I trying to achieve long term, not to get caught up in the details or the goals.
Yeah.
But rather what is truly important to me, and what are my priorities as well. And then what are the interests of the other party, which we've talked about.
Yeah.
The second phase is exploration. Let's explore beyond price or beyond whatever it is we're negotiating. What else is relevant? And create I call it a bargaining mix of all the negotiable items.
Yeah.
So give me an example of a negotiation. I'll give you the bargaining mix.
You are hiring an employee or an agency, and you're negotiating the terms of this collaboration.
Yes. Okay. So there is the salary or the price of this, the cost of this contract. There is how they will work in what format, in person, online, how often will you visit, will they visit you, how many hours, what are they responsible for, how many people. I mean, I could go on. There are so many things to negotiate. And if you don't want to pay the high price that they're asking for, then you could say, well, okay, let me just give you 2 responsibilities. How much would that cost? And now you're negotiating on value rather than just, can you give me a discount?
Oh, that's an amazing reframe right there. Just saying like, hey, let's change what's on the table and open up the conversation into possibilities.
Yes. Look, my services are very expensive. I've worked to get them to a point where they're very, very expensive. But then my clients will say, look, I've got a budget of this much. And I'll say, okay, well, with this budget, let me design something for you. Maybe it won't be 20 hours of my time. Maybe it will be something that you do, and then I can come and meet you for half an hour and we can work through it. So everybody knows this, but I think as soon as we get invested into a negotiation, there's a sunk cost there. There is a mindset there that we immediately get into. We get into the rights approach. I'm deserving, but look at the evidence. But it's not worth this much. Or listen to me. Hear my story. Hear my side of things. Why don't you agree with me? I'm always in my head, and I forget to bring it back to value. Yeah,
and we make it mean things about us. We give it meaning about ourselves, which is not necessarily true when you take that like more wider lens. So, okay, exploration, phase 2.
Phase 3 is the exchange of offers. Many times I've seen people negotiate in this way. What do you want? Well, here's what I suggest. That's too early. And it's not artful, the way that you're presenting. I've got the solution, hear me out, I've got it, I'll take credit. Instead, there is a whole art form in how to present solutions to the other party. We want to present alternatives simultaneously, because people are, according to one research, 47% more likely to say yes when there are options. I don't want to bring it back to children, but I will say that when I say to my 6-year-old, do you want to get into the shower now, in 10 minutes or in 20 minutes, he's more likely to have a shower. There's no yes or no. You want to...
the illusion of choice.
The illusion that you want to show them the scope of what's possible, indicate, what is on the table, what's not on the table. So you want to give some options.
Right.
You want to say, I've thought it through. Here are some options. What do you think? Because it's bringing them into the conversation. It's giving them credit. They're likely to implement when they have chosen the solution, because they're very proud that they chose the solution. And if we tweak that option, if I say, look, we could go one of 3 ways, or I see 3 options, this or this, what do you like? And you might say, 2 is okay, but we've got to tweak this and that. Fine, great. We're not at an impasse. We're just going to keep negotiating on option 2. And also, being able to present multiple options after having thought about it means that I can bundle in the bargaining mix items. So not say, I think, there are 3 options, price this, or price this. But I can say, we can go the higher price with these terms, the middle price with these terms, the lower price with these terms. Which do you like? And I can find out a lot about your interests and priorities by your choice.
I love this. It's so tangible, and applicable.
Yeah, and clear. And it's like, duh, I know this.
Yeah,
everyone will be saying, I know this, I can do this.
You do on an intuitive level, but do we actually live it and practice it? Not when we don't have the framework clear.
No, we need a strategy. Yeah.
So wrapping this up, if you can give one piece of advice to all female founders out there who are negotiating their way to legacy and to their vision, what is one piece of advice that every woman in business should hear?
Understand the value of the solution that you're presenting and what problem you're solving.
Boom. Mic drop.
Value, not cost. Not cost to anyone, only the value. So if I help you to strategize for a negotiation where with my help you will make $1 million more, what does it matter if I charge 900 grand for it? What does it matter if I charge? It doesn't matter what I charge. It's about value, and it's not about the cost.
I think that is so important, and so important also for us ourselves to recognize the value we bring to the table beyond our immediate offer or product or service. Really think, what is this explicit value that we create, which I'm sure will also strengthen your position and your confidence in these conversations, knowing what you bring to the table is so much more. Thank you so much for this. I mean, I learned so much. I'm almost excited to get into my next negotiation. Normally it's something you kind of dread. You're like, oh, have to face off with this. But with this value-led approach, the whole game changes. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing this. We will link all of this in the show notes, but where can our listeners, viewers, find more information on you, your offerings, how you can support them? Where can they find you?
Well, first and foremost, visit the website. The company is called Sheer Negotiations. Sheer like my surname, but sheer like transparent.
Yeah.
So seeing through the noise, seeing through the mess, about seeing what's important. So remember that, sheernegotiations.com. I don't often have open programs, so I offer my products to companies, to organizations. But if you as an individual are interested in getting more information, about 4 times a year I will run events, and you can register your interests. If you go onto the website, there will be a pop-up, register your interest, and when there is an event near you, we will let you know by email.
Amazing. Well, everyone, go check it out, check her out. All the links will be linked in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom and expertise. And thank you guys for listening.